but I'm going to do first things first and do the land acknowledgement because I think that's important. And then I'll introduce myself and get us going. So this land acknowledgement is from the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective. This event takes place on Indakina, which is the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways in the Alnobak who have stewarded Indakina throughout the generations. So I'm Patsy Beffinagrini. Some of you may know me as the person who helps maintain the New Hampshire Network's website and the 10 Towns, 10 Actions Toolkit to Rethink Plastic. But before becoming a volunteer climate activist, I was a registered dietitian nutritionist. I taught in the dietetics program at King State College. And then I'm really going to date myself at the turn of the century. Before there were graphics on the internet, I moved to online teaching. And I directed and taught for the online Master of Public Health and Nutrition program at UMass Amherst. So because of my background in food and nutrition, the New Hampshire Network Steering Committee asked me to work with the New Hampshire Food Alliance to bring you this evening's event. So I'm going to share my screen. I just have a couple slides. So tonight is food for thought, how we can build a climate resilient food system in New Hampshire. So tonight we're going to think about our food and in the wake of climate change and learn about our local New Hampshire food system and consider how to improve it and make it resilient for us, our farmers, our health, and the climate. I just recently finished reading the book Drawdown, which describes solutions that we can put in place today for drawing down carbon equivalents in the atmosphere. And out of 80 solutions presented in that book, what we choose to eat and the methods employed to grow it rank with energy as the top causes and cures for global warming. So for example, the number 3 most impactful solution for drawing down carbon is dealing with our food waste. So we're going to have a panel about that tonight. And number 4 is eating a plant-rich diet. And the Drawdown authors, the Drawdown authors said that as researchers, they were and remain astonished at the impact individual solutions can have, especially as they relate to both the production and consumption of food. So, you know, it is important to think about these individual actions we can take, but too much emphasis on the individual can make us feel overwhelmed. So they also had a quote, "We become human beings by working together." So tonight I'm thrilled to welcome Colleen Stewart to help us think about working together for food and resilient food systems in New Hampshire. So Colleen is the communications coordinator for the New Hampshire Food Alliance, a statewide network that engages and connects people dedicated to growing a thriving, fair, and sustainable local food system in the Granite State. Colleen holds a master's degree in English literature from the State University at New Paltz. While obtaining her degree, Colleen worked for multiple independent local food and lifestyle publications, focusing on supporting the local community of restaurants, farmers, artisans, and other small businesses in the Hudson Valley, while also executing strategy, planning, and marketing for events like Hudson Valley Restaurant Week. Lucky for us, in early 2020, Colleen moved to New Hampshire, and she's a lover of local and excited to be here in New Hampshire to continue the work she's most passionate about, which is supporting local economies and food systems. So I'm gonna let Colleen bring up her slides. And while she's doing that, please keep yourself on mute and you can put your questions in the chat. We're going to take questions after all the speakers are finished. So take it away, Colleen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Patsy. And thank you everybody for having myself here and Paige and Maureen and Representative Ebel, who you're going to meet in a little bit. I think that Patsy did a great job of kind of giving us a little framing for what we're going to talk about today. which is a huge, huge, huge issue, just like a lot of things that are involved with climate change and mitigation, adaptation, all those big words. Building a climate resilient food system is complex. It's a system that requires collaboration and connection for all the moving parts to work together in order to create this resilient system. But at its core, a climate resilient food system is reliable. We grow, we harvest, we prepare, and we deliver enough healthy food for all the people. We'll say New Hampshire for today, but all the people in that food system. And reliable in the way that it is not going to be disrupted. Any of those chains of supply chains, growing, harvesting, preparing, delivering, none of those are disrupted by climate related shocks to our food supply. So we saw, everybody uses this example, but it's really impactful. We saw that those breakdowns during the COVID-19 pandemic, those similar breakdowns in our food supply chain can happen, but with climate related inputs rather than COVID related inputs. Our climate resilient food system, we also see it as an equitable food system. So not only are we able to produce and harvest enough food, but it can get to everyone who needs it, enough culturally preferred foods, enough healthy foods, and enough people across the food chain to have healthy working conditions and living wages. The last thing we envision for our climate resilient food system is it to be regenerative. So as we're doing all this harvesting and producing and preparing and making it equitable to everyone, we're not pulling nutrients and minerals and things out of our food system and our soils, where our food is contributing back to this cycle, back to this system of creating a great ecosystem for future generations. Soil, water, all of those things are kind of involved. And for those of you who are really into the energy and the more of the environmental sides of climate, you will see a lot of similarities. We talk about a lot of the same things, but just in a little bit of a different way. So how does New Hampshire secure a climate resilient food system? Like I said, it can be a complex issue, and a lot of our work stewarding sustainability at UNH and in New Hampshire is about systems, it's about networks, it's about connecting and not working in silos, because when we work in silos, we cannot work together to solve these big complex problems. So our climate action team at the New Hampshire Food Alliance, we were like, where do we even start with this climate resilient food system? Where do we even begin? So we were just like, let's break it down. Let's make a framework for people to look at it, break it down into 6 ways, 6 different areas of the food system and areas of our life in general, living here in New Hampshire, 6 ways that our food system can contribute to building climate resilience here in our state. So it breaks down really nicely into 6 little buckets that are on their own very complex, but at least gives folks working in the food system and beyond a kind of a little bit of a roadmap, a little bit of a framework to understand where they can plug in. And as Patsy pointed out, there's places for individuals to plug in, and there's places for businesses and farmers and restaurants. And each way, and I'll get to the next slide here because that's the good stuff, each way, and you'll see them here, is very different and very broad. It encompasses a lot of different types of businesses and people and ways of thinking and understanding a problem and solving it. So we created this as a starting place to say, okay, let's break this down. Let's break our work down into 6 buckets, and then let's start in on each bucket. And today, a part of that work of breaking down these buckets and getting to work is really diving deep. So we're going to talk a little bit about that 4th way, which I highlighted there, which is reduce and repurpose food waste. And as Patsy pointed out, wasting food waste in landfills creates a significant amount of greenhouse gases. It creates a significant amount of just waste in general for people who don't have enough food, people who are food insecure. This little slide here is kind of an eye-opening. 160 billion pounds of food goes uneaten every year. And all of that is in landfills, creating methane, creating greenhouse gases, and causing issues for our environment. When it could be turned into compost and put in your garden and create more food for more people. So it's just a reframing of how we think about buying food, how we consume it, and how we end up disposing of it. There's always going to be some waste at the end, but how can we put those resources, be regenerative, put that back into our food system in order to make it more vibrant, make it thrive. So that's a little bit of more framing for you. That's the work that we're doing a little bit, the Food Alliance, with folks like Maureen and Karen and Paige, we're gonna get to next. We're gonna hear from the three of them. We're going to hear from Representative Karen Ebel, who is the chair of the New Hampshire Solid Waste Working Group. And I'm just going to read you from her bio a little bit. Representative Karen Ebel is serving her 6th term representing New London and Newbury. She's a former deputy speaker of the New Hampshire House, and she is now serving her 2nd term as a Democratic leader pro tempore. Karen has served 5 terms as House Public Works and Highways Committees members and currently serves on the Finance Committee. She also sits on several other legislative committees, including the House Rules Committees. She is also on the the Nature Conservancy Board, the American Cancer Society Board, and the New London Hospital of Trustees, and has been on the New London Planning Board for almost 2 decades. So Karen is going to talk a little bit about some of the legislation regarding food waste that has been in our legislature this session, and some other attributes of the solid waste working groups. So Karen, take it away.
All right, thanks very much, Paige. And if you want to bring up my first slide, that would be, Colleen, and thanks very much. So first of all, I just want to thank Colleen for inviting me here, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk about what's going on at the state level. I really appreciate her comment about us not working in silos. This is going to do better on solid waste and food waste. The state has to work together, businesses, towns, individual people, and we just have to create a better system of doing things. So just starting with the very basics, many of you may know or not know that the Department of Environmental Services in the state of New Hampshire is the one that manages food waste and solid waste in our state. And they're the ones that implement policy proposals that we come up with. And they do permitting and of landfills, transfer stations, and all that sort of thing. So just as a really basic framework setting thing there. I really got involved when I learned that China back in 2019 was not going to take our plastic and our mixed paper anymore, and it was throwing municipalities really into an uproar as they were trying to do more action as far as their solid waste was concerned. And so I created this study committee, and it was really a voyage into the deep, I would say, because I found out so many things about how this is a global issue, and we really have to work hard on it. So rather than telling you everything we discovered in that committee, I'll just say that we've made a huge amount of progress in the state. We basically have had to update and revamp our solid waste system here in the state of New Hampshire. So, Colleen, can I ask you, is my screen on, my video screen? Because I just want to make sure.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay, all right, okay, I couldn't see. Okay, so the first thing that we really needed to do, which hadn't been done since the mid-90s, is we had to update our statutory disposal reduction goal. And what we've done as a matter of statute is, you can see it written right there on the screen, we've updated so that we're going to try to reduce by weight the amount of solid waste we dispose of in landfills or by incineration or whatever, 25% by 2030 and 45% by 2050. Over the course of many years, due to budget cuts, New Hampshire basically did no longer within DES have a planning section. And so what's happened is we've been able to increase some of the financing for the Solid Waste Bureau in New Hampshire. And we now have two people and some more admin staff supporting the planning section, because if we're going to implement new policies, we really needed the support of DES. One of the things that came out of the HB 617 study committee is that we really should have some sort of a stakeholder group working at the state level. And so by statute, we created the Solid Waste Working Group. That is the group that I chair. And I'll talk some more about that later, but one of our primary responsibilities was to work with DES in the development of the new solid waste management plan. That management plan has also been implemented. We didn't have a new management plan since 2003. I'm happy to say that was issued last October, and a lot of what the working group at DES is working on now is trying to put the plan into place. It's going to take some time and some creativity, but we're excited to have that. And then the other thing, just from a food waste standpoint, is we did implement new composting regulations, and the idea there was to facilitate easier community composting and small scale food drop-off sites for collection. So if you could go to the next slide. I just want to, before I get to this slide, I just want to say one thing, that for people that are really interested in doing more with food waste on a municipal level, which is something that Maureen will get into, we all have to keep in mind that transfer stations are already permitted to deal with food waste as part of their permitting authority for solid waste. So a lot of what municipalities do, it's not like you're starting from a base level like someone who has not dealt with food waste at all. The permitting is a little simpler for municipalities. Anyway, just really briefly, there's the screen on the Solid Waste Working Group. Our statutory authority is spelled out in the statute that's mentioned there. And we're like really digging in now on how to get the solid waste management plan up and running. And if you could go to the next slide. So the thing that we decided to really zero in on is food waste, because as many of you know, 20 to 25% of the, by weight of what's going into our landfills is food waste. And there's so many better things that you can do with food besides throw it away. And the recovery hierarchy that New Hampshire has is modeled on what the EPA food recovery hierarchy is. So it's source reduction, try to recycle and reuse, composting, then waste to energy, and then the very last thing, and unfortunately what we seem to do an awful lot of, is landfill. So if you could just go to the next slide. So one of the responsibilities of the Solid Waste Working Group in trying to implement new policies is to sort of zero in on legislation that could facilitate the policies that we're trying to put into place under the management plan. The first is a bill that I introduced, which would prohibit the disposal of food waste by generators of more than 1 ton per week if there's a facility within a 20-mile radius that can accept the food waste. That passed the House unanimously, and so I'll say more about that in a minute, but what I wanted to say on the HB 300, the way we have it worked out, we have the hierarchy that models in part what the food recovery hierarchy is, and that is, if you're trying to deal with food waste, if you're one of these 1 ton or week generators, the way that you should be doing it is try to reduce the amount of food waste at the source, try to promote consumption by humans. And so we had a lot of support for this bill by food banks, for instance, and that's actually how I got connected with Colleen, which was great. The next thing is you want to promote food consumption by animals, so we want to work with farms. And then the next thing is composting, digestion, and land application as appropriate. And then lastly, energy recovery. So when you were talking about composting, digestion, land application, actually we had businesses, including businesses, huge businesses like Waste Management that operates landfills, come in and support of this legislation because they're also interested in, you know, moving beyond landfills and trying to diversify their activities. So that really helped in the promotion of the bill. The second bill that was promoted by the Solid Waste Working Group was making a $2 million appropriation to a solid waste management fund. And we're targeting food waste reduction and diversion. So the really, really good news is both of these bills passed the House unanimously with a lot of support. And then through working with the Finance Committee, we were able to roll both of these bills into the proposed budget for the New Hampshire House. And that was supported by the Finance Committee unanimously. So it's exciting to see a couple of innovative, forward-looking solid waste reduction pieces of legislation and policy get through the House. So now the budget is being reviewed by the Senate, and we're hoping to have the same amount of support in the Senate as we did in the House. And if those bills passed, we might actually be able to start working toward food waste reduction by large generators and help promote the development of infrastructure to receive the food waste. And if we have our $2 million, especially for smaller operators and towns, they can make an application for the for a grant. It would be a matching grant program, and maybe we can really get some things going. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Representative Ebel. All right, we're going to move on to Maureen's. I think
There
we
you
have
go.
a couple extra slides. There we go. To Maureen, she is part of the New London Waste Reduction Committee. And let me just get a little bit from her bio here. Let's see. Maureen Prohl is a retired speech language pathologist who has been composting with her husband and 3 children for 35 years. She's been involved in school and town committee work since moving to New London in 1998, bringing together her interest in the environment, the benefits of composting, and contributing to at a community level evolved naturally. So Maureen, take it away.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with the first slide on the background of our initiating of food scrap diversion in New London. We had some good foundational data to start with, because in 2020, our master plan planning committee sent out a questionnaire to the 4,500 residents of New London. And they got a return of 850 questionnaires. And of that 850, 68% of the town residents supported food scrap collection at a convenient spot for our town. We also had guidance initially from the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Committee, specifically Olivia. And we also had help with Mark Morgan. Mark Morgan from the city of Lebanon came down and looked at our transfer station and our stump dump, as we call it. And he made some excellent suggestions on how we should collect further data. So we did collect more information, but not until we had talked to the Department of Public Works, the Board of Selectmen, and our new Waste Reduction Committee members. The the most critical aspect was getting, and it wasn't difficult, getting the Department of Public Works on board. We have a wonderful Public Works Director who has been helpful from the beginning. So we decided to do another survey, and that was a short, brief 3-question survey that we gave out at a town community forum. And in that, we asked only 3 questions. How do you currently get rid of your waste? 93% of the people use the transfer station. Would you support or participate in a food scrap diversion program? 86% of the people said they would. And would you pay to be part of the program? 55% said they would pay. So I thought that was very, very positive. I'm not going to talk about the transfer station permit because Karen's already talked about that. So we can go on to the next slide. So our waste reduction committee really came together in July of 2022, and we have a really enthusiastic group. We settled on several goals, but the primary goal initially was to have a food scrap diversion program, pilot program, and to continue to educate the New London residents about other ways and other materials that they could divert from the landfill. So I'll talk a little bit later on what we did with education, but in October, in fact, October 28th, we started the food pilot program. We advertised for the pilot program, and we selected 20 out of 33 people households who signed up for it. And those people simply said they were interested, and we picked the 20 people from all different areas of town. We wanted to get and different demographics, single family homes, condos, apartments, and that kind of thing, because we wanted to get we wanted to encapsulate what the town really looked like in this program. We interviewed 3 haulers slash composters to pick up our food scraps at our transfer station, which people had already said they were using. And we chose a small compost dedicated company. You might have heard about it. It's Renewal Compost Company. It's out of Manchester. So they have been another group that has been wonderful. They gave up, the town bought the buckets. We made up a 2-sided instruction sheet, the do's and don'ts of composting. We had pictures of kitchen countertop buckets, etc., and delivered them to the 20 families and kept in touch with them periodically about how things were going. We asked for feedback, and they gave some excellent feedback. And we kept it as much as possible. We kept it in front of the public. We spoke at the selectmen's meeting. We put things in the articles in the Intertown Record, our small local newspaper. We put things on our website. We put things in the town publication, just to keep the program out in front of the public. So how did we pay for it? Well, as I told you, we have this great Public Works Director, Bob Harrington. He used his revolving recycling fund to finance this program. So the 20 collection buckets were $200, and you can see the tote was $80. And then every week they would pick up a tote, and one tote, actually it's always been only one tote. We've never gone to 2 totes, but so we had $37 a week for pickup. I think what's interesting is that after 5 months, I forgot to say that Renewal Compost has kept data on a weekly basis on how many pounds a week they pick up. So by month 5, it was only supposed to go for 3 months, but it was going so well that we kept doing it. So by month 5, we had diverted 3 tons of food scraps from 20 households, which I thought was, it was great. And this is a great group of people. If I have time, I'd love to tell you what some of their feedback was, which I found quite surprising. But I'll get back to that if we have time. So we kept our eye on the ball and we said, okay, it looks like we're going to want to expand this. We had very positive feedback. We had a lot of people who wanted to get in the program, who couldn't be in the program. And so we knew that people were interested. So we drafted a warrant article for our 2023 town meeting. And that was to allocate $12,000. Oh, can you go to the next slide, please? To allocate $12,000 to expand the pilot program to 140 more New London residents. So we're going to get that off the ground starting June 1st and with a start date of July 1st. And again, that money, the $12,000, some people might be interested in this, but the $12,000 is going to be coming from the year-end surplus. So I think people thought, oh, what's not to like about that? So can you go back? Okay, so the focus on education and outreach. I wanted to say that I have already told you about what kinds of things we have done for education, but what we did on the town website was develop a top 10 tips for trash. Mostly, I think it's almost exclusively food scrap diversion. But we also have a couple people on our committee who are really devoted to plastic recycling and diversion and reduction. And so we've also gone into posting a table, as it were, of different materials that can be diverted from the landfill and where you can take them. If you can't take them, they already know what they can take to the transfer station because we publicized that quite a bit. But there's other things that our transfer station doesn't take. So we've given them ideas. Of course, they have to travel. I think most of the places are like 30 minutes from New London. But if they're really devoted to keeping painted furniture out of the landfill, they can find out where to take it on our town webpage. Also, when things are coming up, for instance, styrofoam collection date up in Lebanon or Hanover, they'll put that on the front page of our town website just to alert people in town that there's something coming up that's different. So you want to go to the next? We had our first kind of educational event was on Earth Day. We had speakers from Hopkinton. Bonnie Christie talked about what they're doing in Hopkinton and statewide to divert different items from the food trash. We played the Compost Story 6-minute movie on composting, and we had the educator from NRRA come and talk about many different types of materials and how it looks on a larger scale. We also had Olivia from Upper Valley Regional. I can't say her last name, that's why I'm avoiding it. We had her come and she did a compost demonstration at our town library. And we had other ways of composting. We had somebody do one of those countertop electric composters. And we had a tumbler, and we had worms. We had vermiculture there. So we had 4 different types of composting on display. And then we went upstairs and had the 3 speakers. We passed out these resources for composting at that meeting, and have also posted it around town, telling them how they can get the composting bins from our town public works. they we talked about different products that you can use for your backyard composting. Can you go to the next slide, please? And we gave a little map of the towns. Actually, what it's not called the stump dump, it's the brush and metal disposal center. And we gave the people a map of where they can pick up or brown items at our town disposal center. They can go and pick up various kinds of materials there for their backyard composting. So that kind of wraps it up. Do I have a couple seconds?
Yeah, you have like 2 minutes.
Okay, I would like to tell you what the people in the pilot program said about the program, because I thought it was really informative. I was very curious. I asked them about 5 or 6 questions, and I was really curious about why they joined up, because some people were saying, oh, they think they're going to save money or whatever. Well, most of them joined up because they expressed it was a value, a community value. They wanted to keep methane gas. They wanted to support the environment. 15 out of the 18 respondents said that because it aligned with their values. Only 3 of the 18 said that they wanted to save the town money. They said to a person, said it was really easy, that one of the things that they most noticed was they realized how much food scraps they were actually throwing in their trash. They had no idea that they were throwing that much out. So it was this whole program was very educational. The other thing that they really talked about, almost all of them, was how light their garbage bags were. That was just wonderful. They also they made some recommendations. One was that you need to open this up to more people in town, and that was a real selling point for the Board of Selectmen. They did not like the compostable bags because they fell apart. And they didn't want to they wanted to take the transfer station attendants out of the mix because they thought that was giving them more work to do. But we never asked them to do it in the first place. Bob Harrington, our DPW director, wanted them to make sure it was only the 20 people so that our data would be accurate. So that's it about how we got it going and how we hope to continue it and grow it every year is my hope, our hope.
Yes, awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. That was great. A good overview of kind of that municipal side of composting as a community. I love that sentiment of values. That's always really a big part of our work in general in food systems, is it aligns with our values and what we believe in, hold dear. All right, the next person we are going to hear from is Paige Wilson, who is a waste reduction and diversion planner for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And I'll read a little bit from her bio as well. Paige Wilson has been providing solid waste technical assistance to municipalities, nonprofits, and local groups for over 5 years. Much of that assistance has focused on food waste reduction, composting, and education. She has helped secure local, state, and federal grants to support a handful of projects that aim to reduce food waste and develop closed loop systems. Paige, take it away. She's going to talk a little bit about home composting.
Awesome. Thanks, Colleen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thanks again for inviting me, and I'm happy to chat with folks tonight. And I just want to thank Maureen for just giving a great overview of the education efforts and the project in New London. And it does segue into my portion, which is just to talk about individual efforts to reduce food waste at home, and focusing on individual efforts, but thinking of us as a collective, as a state, and the fact that we can make a difference on our own when we all work together to reduce food waste. So just aligning with the New Hampshire waste management hierarchy and the EPA food recovery hierarchy, I just wanted to highlight first some resources that folks can use to help with preventing food waste from from the source, which, we have control as the source of food waste to reduce it in our homes and on a daily basis. So there are a number of different strategies that people can use to limit the food that we do, or the food waste that we may create. And proper food storage is just one of those strategies. It's important to know whether something lasts longer in the fridge or on the counter. I think a lot of us, maybe this is an assumption, but I think many of us think that the fridge is actually the best place for a lot of our fruits and vegetables, but that's not always the case. When I was doing my own kind of research, I found that it's better to store whole tomatoes on the counter, and I had been putting mine in the fridge. So I have now made that change, and I've noticed that they're lasting a lot longer. So I've gone through savethefood.com, which is the first link, just to go through their interactive storage guide. It's really great to use. They have great graphics and tips for how to plan your meals, for also using up what you have in your pantry and thinking really creatively. And just along with food storage on the counter, there's also different places in your refrigerator that vary in humidity and temperature, and depending on where you put your food in the fridge can impact whether it lasts longer or not. So the graphic on the slide right here, it is a little small, but I did add a link to it. It's through the NRCS, and I encourage folks to look at that after. These slides will be available so people can dive into these links a little bit more. And I've included a couple of resources from NUMOA just to help with understanding date labels, and a national behavioral change campaign through the EPA, as well as refed.org. They have a lot of great data about food systems and different solutions based on public and private sectors, and whether you're a homeowner or a business or a hospital, and all those types of different sectors that contribute to our food system. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So next on the EPA hierarchy is about food donations. So I wanted to highlight that the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic has a series of fact sheets to talk about more of the legal aspects of food donation. So on refed.org, there's a policy finder where it highlights the liability protections for food donation. It's also known as the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, and it essentially covers any potential liability issues, or, if you donate something out of good faith, you're generally covered by the Bill Emerson Act, as long as that donation was made out of good faith and wasn't intentionally manipulated to harm somebody who's going to receive your food donation. And they actually, I believe that the FDA just updated that act recently to expand the liability protections from individuals donating to other individuals. So rather than going through a food bank, I believe that was actually done in March. So just a way to expand our ability to donate food. The fact sheets also cover tax incentives for businesses who are looking to donate food, and they also cover the regulations behind date labels, which are largely based around food quality and not necessarily food safety. So a lot of them are set by manufacturers just to keep food rotating off of our shelves in the grocery stores, and not necessarily related to food safety. There are a couple for baby food and prepackaged sandwiches, I believe, are the two that are regulated in New Hampshire. And lastly, there's some legal protections and rules around feeding food scraps to pigs in New Hampshire. And I did note on the bottom of the slide just a map of New Hampshire farms across the state. So I just encourage folks to maybe look at that after and see what farms are in your area, who might be able to take food scraps to feed their animals, but also who might be interested in composting. So I guess that kind of leads to my next slide, which highlights that when we do, maybe back one, sorry, Colleen, that when we do have food scraps after we've maybe donated it to all of our outlets in our area, it's good to compost what we have left. And this is just a really simplified graphic to show how composting kind of works in a pile. We have our inputs of raw materials, our greens and our browns, which I'll explain a little bit in the next couple slides. And as you mix that with air and water, the decomposers kind of naturally come into your pile and they help to break things down. At the end, you have a finished product that looks and smells just like soil and is really great to add to our soils to help with erosion control and soil stability and helping with plants. So next slide, please. Oh, I think the one before that. Yep, thanks, Colleen. So I really encourage people to think of your compost pile as like a mini ecosystem and almost like a live science project. And it's something that you can always revive and come back to. And if you happen to make a mistake and things go a bit stagnant, it's really, I encourage people not to get very discouraged, or at least take it as a learning process, because I've been composting for years now, and I'm still learning things about what I put into my compost pile. But it really is all about supporting the decomposers and creating an environment kind of like a Goldilocks, the just right vibe of air and water and food, and to make sure that you're promoting their lives, and they'll essentially do all the work for you and will break down your organics into compost. And they help to recycle food scraps into a nutrient-rich soil amendment that can be added to our soil, as I mentioned, just to help with erosion control and nutrient intake by plants and all that good stuff. So next slide just kind of breaks down a bit more about our brown and green materials. And if you think of it like baking a cake, it's kind of like your dry and wet ingredients. It's really good to keep materials small. It actually helps speed up the process of composting. If your things are kind of like a fruit salad size, like bite size, and it's good to maintain a consistent moisture content, kind of like a damp sponge. So there's a easy way to tell if your compost pile is too wet or too dry, and it's just called the sponge, like the squeeze test. And you just take a pile of your material in your hand, and you want to squeeze it a bit to see if there's going to be water coming through your knuckles as you kind of hold it in a fist, or if you open it up, if it's really dry and it's not clumping very well, then you might need to add some water to it. But generally you want to have good airflow, keeping things turned, and adding a good mix of materials to allow for spaces of pockets for air to flow through, and keep your decomposers alive and not drown them. So again, it's kind of a learning process. And if you're new to this and you start composting, you'll kind of see how your compost pile reacts depending on what you put into it. Which leads to the next slide. It just kind of lists some of the things that you can put in your home composting system. This list of things that you can put in might be a little bit different actually it is different for your home composting system versus at a town scale or at a commercial composting facility. And that's simply because your home composting system, it's much smaller, and because there's not as many material inputs, you don't have a town of people putting their food waste into a pile or into a compost system. It takes a bit longer for your home composting system to heat up, and therefore things might break down a bit slower. That also means that you might have some more things to consider. So when we think about putting our fruit and vegetable scraps into our compost, at a home scale, because it's much smaller, you might have to be a little bit more sensitive to like citrus, oranges, lemons, limes, even the peels themselves might take a bit longer to break down compared to like eggshells and nutshells. If you crush them up, they might break down a bit faster. When looking at your brown materials, which are your dry ingredients, You just want to make sure that you have a good mix of materials, because those different particle sizes help to create different air pockets, and it promotes airflow, again, to allow your decomposers to breathe. So the next slide just highlights some of those things that you want to keep out of your compost. One thing I want to mention is that meat and dairy and like seafood shells and oils and grease are things that you want to keep out of your home compost, but at a facility level, like a town scale or a commercial scale, those are allowed under our updated composting rules. So I just want to point that out, that again, this list is going to probably look different for a higher scale facility, but you always want to keep cat and dog waste out, and fruit stickers, as well as like staples from tea bags and that kind of thing. So there are some common contaminants that you want to keep out regardless of the scale that you're composting at. And generally, for home composting, there's a good saying is keeping things, your recipe as easy as 1 to 3, which means that you want to add 1 volume and 1 part of green materials, which are your food scraps. They're really high in nitrogen, and balance that out with equal 3 parts of browns or your carbon-based materials to help absorb the moisture from your food scraps. And just generally, you always want to cover your food scraps with a layer of your brown materials, because it does help with odor control, and it can help avoid bears or pests and flies and rats and all of those fun critters that tend to live in New Hampshire. So the next slide just shows some options for how folks can compost at home. Each one kind of comes with its own cost and labor requirements in order to keep it going, as well as different equipment needs. But the beauty of it is that you can really set something up that's unique to what you have available for space and time and resources. You can mix and match different things and kind of test out to see what works for you. A lot of these require like a shovel or a pitchfork to just, help turn material and break things up. There's options for composting tumblers, either horizontal or vertical. So it's those top 3 photos on the left. One thing about the vertical composters, which is that bright blue bin, sometimes those can be hard to turn when your food scraps settle to the bottom. I've heard that some folks have a hard time lifting it up and getting it turning again. So in that aspect, the horizontal options might be a little bit better. There's also an opportunity, depending on space, to have a 3-bin system where you manage your piles based on the maturity level of your pile. You can kind of move it between different bin areas that are made of pallets that you might have found at the transfer station, or cinder blocks, or you might just have one big pile where you're just trying to just get rid of it, and maybe you don't really want too much involvement, but you're just trying to divert it away from the waste stream. So there's really, like I said, a bunch of different options, and I'm happy to talk with folks after, but I wanted to note on the next slide that if you get any kind of tool to help with composting, I highly suggest at least investing in a composting thermometer. Mainly because temperature readings are the best indicator for how your compost pile is going and how healthy it is and whether it's active or not. When I went to the main composting school, they really stressed that the compost thermometer and temperature really is like the best indicator for how things are going. And I just added in this little infographic on the right from Rio Temp, which is one of the manufacturers for these types of composting thermometers. And I apologize if the text is kind of small, but I really just wanted to highlight that the optimal temperature that indicates that things are really active and going is the 131 degrees baseline, I guess, or goal temperature to reach. So yeah, I think the last thing I just added in today, actually, I really wanted to do a plug real quick for the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Has a community composting 101 course that they're offering to residents in the Northeast for free right now because it's International Compost Awareness Week. So if folks want to scan the QR code, I also have the link that I can throw in the chat. But if you sign up this week, it's free, and usually it's $100, but it's all online and it's a self-paced course. So you don't necessarily have to complete it this week, even if you register, but it really is going to cover a lot of the composting basics, but also talking a little bit more about bringing in your community, whether it's a town scale or just, you know, working on a community garden. I really suggest that people take a look at it since it's free and it's a great education source. So that is my spiel, and happy to share resources and talk to people after. So
Awesome. Thank you, Paige. And thank you, Representative Ebel and Maureen. I think that was a nice overview for folks, just kind of this one way. And it's actually one part of one way. Like I said, these are big buckets that we're working in and building climate resilience. And this is just one of those ways that, and we really wanted to demonstrate the way that an individual and a town can come together as a community and really, you know, try to start solving a big issue for our climate. So I will hand it back to Patsy and we could do some questions. I'll stop sharing my screen too, so we can all look at each other. And yeah, happy to take questions as you have them.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and also Karen and Maureen and Paige. It was excellent. I think we have a lot of really practical information that we can use at our own homes for composting. Susan Richmond has a question about asking if you can explain the difference between composting and digestion. I think that may be for Karen. It was asked when she was doing that, but maybe any of you
Right, and Paige, you may be able to help me too, but composting is really what was just described to you by Paige. It was pretty clear what it involves, and if you're doing it on a more industrial scale, I think like farmers or whoever, they make long windrows and they turn them over time. Digestion, actually, it's generally called anaerobic digestion, is really a big facility. I mean, in my mind, I almost think of it like one of those huge gas containers, like when you drive into Boston and they use enzymes, possibly chemicals, to break down the materials. And many times, like there's a company called AgriCycle, you could look it up. They use they produce energy through the digestion of the organic matter. So it's much more of a manipulated kind of process. So hopefully that, so I guess I'll just add to that was one of the reasons, for instance, that the companies, the businesses were supportive of moving ahead, because as you know, as they diversify, and I like to encourage this, as they diversify from landfilling or perhaps incineration, they want to move to using food scraps, collecting them from towns and individuals, and then feeding them into their anaerobic digesters. And we had a presentation to the working group from Waste Management where they work on collection and digestion, and then a lot is actually transferred to Lawrence where the septic lagoons are up there, and they work some more on the digestion, and they use the energy that's produced actually to pretty much run their facility up there. So I think it's a process that's used pretty frequently in Europe and something that we should be doing more of here.
Great, thank you. Cynthia Walter was wondering if you could comment on how New Hampshire's either behind or ahead of our neighboring states.
That's something I love to talk about, because it's very frustrating to me in a way. But when we were doing our original study committee, we learned a lot what other states are doing. So I'll just, start with food waste diversion in Vermont. Well, all our northeastern states, except for Maine and us, have put into place. They started out by a 1 ton a week generators food waste disposal ban. Vermont has been ratcheting it down. It went from a ton to 1 ton. From a ton to a half a ton, and now it applies to all individuals. They can't throw away their food waste. Massachusetts started with 1 ton a week. They've just pushed it down to a half a ton. Connecticut has done it. New York is doing it. It's just the trend, and a lot of the reason for it. It just makes so much sense because it's a huge contributor to landfilling, and it's also a much better way of dealing with food to try to get it out to humans and things of that nature. The other thing, I'll just focus on Massachusetts. They have waste disposal bans. So I've talked about the food waste. They recently put into place a disposal ban on mattresses, textiles, any number of things. And this is all to start to try to develop an infrastructure for recycling and to avoid landfilling. The other thing is Massachusetts, for instance, hasn't permitted a new landfill since I think they said 1994 and 1995. All these other states are very actively working to stop landfilling. And in the meantime, we're talking a lot about landfill siting, which is important, and the construction of new landfills. We should really be pushing every way that we can to reduce what we're landfilling, because, who wants another landfill? And especially, just one other point that's worth making here is if it's a private landfill that's constructed, the landfill can pretty much take what they want from other states, and our state, under the interstate commerce clause, we can't ban out of state waste. So 50% of the waste coming into New Hampshire at this point is out of state. Our tipping fees that we pay for the deposition in landfills are lower, and part of it is that other states are cutting back on what can be landfilled. So we're kind of sitting ducks in some way.
Yeah, it's a big problem for New Hampshire. Thank you. Okay, so the next question, where I lost it. Oh, this is for Maureen. Someone is wondering how you decided to ask for $12,000 for your next step in doing your next pilot program.
Well, one of the Board of Selectmen, who's actually on our committee as a non-voting member, calculated it based on how many tons we had already kept out, how much the buckets cost, how much the pickup would be for 10% of our town. So he went from 20 households to 10% of our town, which is 160 households. So he just, back calculated if we had 160 people, and this is how much they're diverting based on what the pilot program did, then this is how much it's gonna cost us, and this is how many totes we're gonna need, etc. Does that answer the question?
Makes sense to
Okay.
me. I don't know if anyone wants to tackle this one. This one sounds like a long answer, or it could be short. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you've discussed this at the solid waste management meetings. Have you discussed recycling and composting at or near supermarkets or big box stores so people don't have to go to the recycling center and to the grocery store?
I mean, we haven't talked about that specifically, but there are many grocery stores that are actually composting. Let me clarify that, are actually having their food scraps picked up by food banks and, in the first instance, but in respect to this question, they're having their food scraps picked up by corporations like AgriCycle and taken to anaerobic digesters. I think it would be a permitting issue, but it also would require a willingness by the markets as to whether they wanted to engage in that. I will say the other thing here in New London is we've been able to talk about climate action. We've been able to work with our local Hannafords, which was already collecting their own plastic film, the thin plastic stuff, and having it recycled. The Hannaford truck basically goes around and picks up the film plastic and takes it to a distribution point where it's subsequently recycled. But we were able to work with our local Hannaford to take some of our municipal film plastic that was getting collected at our transfer station. So,
Yeah, and
but
Matthew,
it's not a subject we've discussed specifically.
Matthew, in Keene at the Monadnock Co-op, Elm City Compost has some bins set up so people can bring their compost there. You have to pay for Elm City Compost. The bins have locks on them, so you must pay for the passcode or whatever. But so somebody is kind of working on that in Keene, but I don't know how extensive it is everywhere. So Colleen, this question's for me. I was wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about the New Hampshire Alliance's Climate and Food Action Team, and also your food system policy and food system and funding policy team, because the Climate Action Team sounds a little bit like our climate working group, and the policy team might be a little bit like the legislative working group and the network, and just a little bit about them and maybe how we might work together.
Yeah, thank you for asking. That's a great question. I put a little bit in the chat there. I think some folks were asking for some of our documents, the 6 waste document. And I also put our climate and food action teams webpage in the chat as well. But some insider knowledge that is not really shared yet. We're seeing a lot of energy around this conversation of food waste. So our climate and food action team, which, as I said in the beginning, has been trying to tackle this big issue of climate and food and don't really know where to start. I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that food waste is a good place for us as a network of food system professionals to start. So we're probably going to be transitioning that team into, we won't probably change the name, but it'll be really focused on food waste and reduction at all levels. And just kind of working within our food system to help bring together folks outside of our food system to help with that food waste reduction. So more to come on that. Stay tuned. And the way you can keep up with that actually is by signing up for our newsletter, which I'll put in the chat there. And that's always going to have all the best information about what we're doing, but also what a lot of our other network partners in the food system, folks like Paige at DES and folks like Representative Ebel, we have policy updates regularly. Also other organizations like NOFA New Hampshire and Organic Farming Association. We are trying to be a good place to get the news about what's happening in the food system. So if that is interesting to you, definitely sign up for our newsletter there. But yeah, thank you for asking that.
All right. So I think you've answered the question about the list for the building resilient food systems. So Paul's asking, has there been studies done on seeing what the ratio is between composting and waste to energy? And I don't, and she's, Paul's asking about what's Vermont doing. Maybe Karen, you answered that.
No, actually, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. There may be information out there. I mean, I think there's a lot of studies that have been done. And I just, while I have the screen here, I just want to say, I don't have the link for you, but if you Google New Hampshire DES Solid Waste Working Group, you can find, we have had loads of presentations by a lot of people from the industry, from different states on all different subjects, including food waste diversion. And I encourage you to get on there and look. You can find the documents that were referred to in my presentation, the new long range plan, all sorts of things. We need to do better as a state. I'll tell you that.
Okay.
Betsy,
Sure. Go ahead, Paul.
I was going to add to Karen's comment. So I asked the question, and I think composting is awesome. You learn so much about how to, tend your garden and things of that nature. But I raised that question because I'm actually in conversation with folks in Vermont, and as you may know, they have a food waste mandate, so they've been able to drive a lot of composting. But they've also been able to fund, for example, up in Montpelier, their state capital. They're actually, I spoke to a gentleman by the name of Chris Cox. Chris runs the organics to waste energy plant in Montpelier, and they got an $18 million grant. And basically what they did is they upgraded their digester. So they're taking food waste, dairy products from Cabot and what have you, and they are powering 30% of the electricity for the town of Montpelier. So I think it's worth exploring, because as you look at institutionalizing food waste in the schools, in businesses, if you can do it at a large scale, might be worth looking at. And I agree with Karen's assessment that sometimes digesters have their issues. But if you look at the whole picture, at reducing food waste, diverting it, it could be something to think about. But thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Laura, I'm not exactly sure what your question is, except to ask the presenters if they can do a presentation for you. Did I miss something in your question? I don't know where Laura is. She could not be here still.
Laura, I will put my email in the chat, and you are welcome to email me, and we can chat about that. That sounds like a great opportunity to discuss.
Okay, and Scott is asking, can you use the fire pit ash in the compost or to enhance garden soil? Maybe.
Yeah, I'll take that. I was going to say, yeah, you can add fire pit ash to your compost pile and to your garden. I think it's a good practice for your compost pile to put a layer between every foot or like foot and a half of your compost pile, just because if you add too much, it can mess with the pH, because it has a high like alkaline pH content, I guess, or like composition of it. But with gardening, I think there's a lot of good like nutrients like magnesium and calcium and phosphorus in firewood ash that can help with plant growth. I haven't really used it as much directly in plant and gardening, so I don't know. You probably want to do some more research before you add, an excessive amount or even a small amount to your garden, and maybe kind of go as needed as it goes, and observing how things react to it. So I would say yes, but proceed with some caution.
Thanks, Paige. Really appreciate it. Morgan has a question about a New Hampshire network meetup group to discuss waste solutions. We do have a plastics working group, so that's our main method of talking about solid waste through the New Hampshire network. We meet every other Sunday night. So if you're interested in the plastics working group, please go to the New Hampshire network's website. I'll put that in the bottom of the chat, and you'll get that from the notes for the discussion this evening. And there's also John Swan is very active in our network from Save Forest Lake, and he knows a lot about solid waste issues and keeps us connected with Karen Ebel's group at the state level. He's very good at letting us know what's going on. So we are involved, but we're mostly right now really focused on plastic waste. Susan and Don, have I missed anything? Any questions? I know Ann, you had your hand up, so if you want to ask your question that you had, I'm happy to let you do that.
I'm okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good.
And-
It was answered by somebody else.
Oh,
It was asked by somebody else, and so it was answered. Thank you.
thanks, Ann. And then Susan has a question for Colleen. A question about making our food system more climate resilient. I'm very concerned about farmers. The farm bill's coming up, and I learned recently that there's almost nothing in the farm bill as far as like crop insurance for small farmers, not a lot of support for small farmers. And, I'm just wondering if you or anybody else know about how we're supporting small farmers in New Hampshire, besides everybody belong to a CSA and go to your farmer's market, please.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we should never stop doing those smaller things. I'll put air quotes because they're not small, they're big. They're big things that we all do together and as a community, supporting our local farmers with our dollars, voting with our dollars. But with that said, those big sweeping changes, especially when it comes to being resilient to climate change as a farmer and as a grower, that a lot of that comes down through policy, and particularly federal policy, but state policy as well. I think that the Farm Bill is always a great opportunity to revisit that, how that money is broken up right now. A lot of that money in the Farm Bill is focused on supporting crop insurance for commodity growers, growers who do not grow in a regenerative, and that's a big loaded word, but we'll just use it for the sake of time, regenerative way. They grow in monocultures. They grow one crop all the time, every single year, and it's not contributing, like Paige was speaking about with composting, it's not contributing things back to the soil. It's creating weak soils that erode. And as we have these intense weather patterns, this intense rains, intense snows and winds and all these wonderful things that are coming our way, our soils will be washed away. And if we don't have soil, we cannot grow food. And if we don't have food, we can't feed our people. So, and that goes for everybody. That doesn't go just for the small farmers here in New Hampshire. That goes for the big commodity growers in Iowa and in California. We've heard a lot about, wildfires and droughts in California, and, water that's not able to be dispersed from the Colorado River. I don't want to go down a doom spiral, but like all of those things are real impacts to not only our lives in general, but our food system and how we get our food from California to New Hampshire. Because in reality, we cannot grow everything we need here in New Hampshire. We can grow a lot of it. And there's a lot of initiative right now. The New England Feeding New England project, growing 50% of our food by 2060. There's a lot of initiative in that, but the main thing is that we will never be able to grow all of it. So we have to think big when it comes to things like the Farm Bill in protecting and enlivening our farmers across the nation to really embrace these practices that are regenerative, that are, working with our soils, working with our lands, not working on them. And that in turn will create a climate resilient food system just from that start, from that soil. We will have the food and then we'll be able to work off from there. I don't want to get too much into it. I hope does that cover your question? Do you have additional questions maybe to clarify? Because it's a really big systemic issue that yeah, some big policy changes kind of have to be made to address.
And yeah, big in at the federal level and also big in New Hampshire. I was watching the House vote one day this session, and the farmers market, WIC farmers market nutrition program got voted down. And I felt like, please just let me stand up there. I can tell you, this is also going to support farmers. Everybody just kept saying it didn't work in 2011. And I'm assuming there's a lot more farmers markets around that people can tap into now than in 2011. I just felt so bad. I feel bad for the moms and the kids that aren't getting food, but I felt bad that nobody was supporting the farmers and saying, this is a great way for farmers to build their businesses. So,
yeah, it's that bill was a tough one. I heard about that also, but I think the big point there is that it's I think Maureen brought this up, or Paige or Karen, somebody did, but values. It's a value. A lot of this work and a lot of how we view our food and our food system is about our personal values, how we value food. When we're just throwing food in the garbage, like, what does that say about our value system of food? But alternatively, when we're trying to push for these changes and get good, healthy, nutritious local food into the bellies of babies, like, that's, it's a value system. And I'm not here to, be the moral authority on anything, but that's what that is about. And I think a lot of our work is education around that value system. Go ahead, Maureen, I'm done talking.
Well, I just wanted to say very quickly that over the last couple of years, I've been working with the Composting Association of Vermont, and they have actually a year and a half ago, they wrote a USDA grant for a farm municipal kind of loop between local small farmers and small communities. And they have actually been working with 6 farms in New Hampshire. And this is kind of a new thing because usually they're in Vermont. They have done a lot of work in Vermont and been very successful. So the reason I say that is because I think that towns, I'm just speaking now from towns and small farmers, some of them need assistance. They need assistance from people who know what they're doing. Not everybody can go spend a week at the Maine composting school, but if you have your $1 million or your $2 million in the future, you might want to consider getting some either regional grants or matching grants, or in some ways helping farmers and communities work together to form a composting loop, because there's just, everybody's doing their own thing. And maybe if we could get a couple of towns together to do that one thing, that we would be more successful and supportive of each other. That's my spiel. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Susan, do you want to ask the last question, and I'll bring up my slides to tell people what the New Hampshire Network's doing next and let everybody go for the evening. Go ahead. You're on mute.
Okay. Can you keep us alerted to where we should take action? If you send it to New Hampshire Network, we'll include it in our legislative action alerts. So let us know, or you can let us know in your own newsletter if there's a segment that you're always dedicating to alerts, so we don't miss our chances.
Yeah, definitely will do that. Karen, did you want to say something quick policy related?
Yeah, I there's so many things to say, but I know that the Kent Street Coalition does various policy alerts. It's really, there's so many bills that are moving so quickly at so many times. It's really hard to monitor everything, but they do a really good job of taking care of those things and sending alerts out. I just I hope I just want to say a couple of things. Talking about farmers, there are 100 to 200 tons of trash going to places like Ohio weekly, if not more. And a lot of the farmland out there is being used for landfills. I mean, it's just a waste. And part of the problem, you know, we're not, places like Massachusetts, they're not landfilling, which is great, but that doesn't mean that the stuff's not getting landfilled, because it's still getting shipped out. And a lot of open acreage, you know, if farmers are having trouble, they use it in different ways. And one of the ways that they use it is for landfilling, which to me is just tragic. The other thing I just want to say, I have to say, talk about PFAS just a little bit. There's so much that we're trying to do at the solid waste working group level to try to do some sort of source reduction for PFAS, because of course it's in food packaging, it can leach into foods, we consume it, and it, you know, there's just this cycle, and we're trying to get rid of that. And all of this really goes back to this concept of values. We have a lot of great policy concepts that we're trying to put into place, working with DES, working with legislators. But unless we can get the legislators to vote to support some of these policies, we're just going to be stuck in place. So, you know, it's really key to try to figure out ways of monitoring what we're working on. And we really appreciate the support that folks like you give us as we try to do it here. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Colleen and Paige and Maureen. That just fabulous. I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us tonight. And I'd also like to thank Donna Reardon and Susan Richmond and Mary Beth Raven, who helped me get going on this. So I appreciate your support and help. So some upcoming events. As an aside, number 2 issue on drawdown is windmill related. So we're going to be having an event on clearing the fog, myths and misconceptions around offshore wind in New Hampshire. That's on June 5th. So you can go to the New Hampshire Network's website to get the information about that. And then we're having an in-person summit on June 17th, starting in the morning. I believe we're going at 9:30, so till noonish. And then the plastics working group is going to have a get together after that, because we haven't met one another yet. And then a statewide event on August 12th. That's going to be in Concord, New Hampshire. So it's for all different types of environmental groups. Keep New Hampshire Green, the environmental summit. So John Swan is spearing that up, and just want you to be aware of all those things that are coming up. And then the plastics working group is meeting on May 14th, Sunday night. And then the climate working group will be meeting on June 7th. So just, you know, keep going to the website to see all of that information. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.